The Nuclear Age, written by Blake Hamilton, narrated by Dan Levy. Prologue. Is there a future for nuclear power, medicine, and weaponry? Well, from my vantage point, the answer appears to be yes. Human progress is clearly an exponential curve, and we have never walked away from a dangerous and world-changing discovery. However, the line between destruction and prosperity lies with one crucial factor: accountability. In almost every example I have observed in the research for this book, from Hiroshima to Fukushima, the greatest risk of splitting the atom lies not in the technology, but with human error, specifically the emotions of impulsiveness, short-sightedness, and hubris. But if you're paying attention, what I have just identified is not human input, quite the opposite. As this book will explain, the issue regarding the future of nuclear energy is human inactivity, humans acting on instinct rather than considering as many perspectives as possible. In the midst of the Cuban Missile Crisis, the world held its breath as the United States and the Soviet Union stood on the brink of nuclear war. As tensions escalated and the U.S. discovered that the Soviet Union was installing nuclear missiles in Cuba, the situation grew more precarious by the day. But the true terror came on October 27, 1962, when a Soviet submarine, the B-59, was detected by U.S. forces. As the U.S. Navy began dropping depth charges, the submarine's crew found themselves running low on oxygen and facing the very real possibility of imminent destruction. It was then that the submarine's captain, Valentin Savitsky, made a decision that could have changed the course of history forever. Believing that war had already broken out between the U.S. and the Soviet Union, he ordered the launch of a nuclear torpedo at the U.S. fleet. But there was a catch. The launch required the agreement of all three senior officers on board the submarine, including Vasily Arkhipov, the second in command. Arkhipov was the only one who objected to the launch, arguing that it was too risky and that they should surface and return to Moscow to discuss the situation further. Despite the immense pressure from the captain and the other senior officer, Arkhipov stood his ground and convinced them to surface instead of launching the torpedo. It was a moment that would ultimately defuse the crisis and prevent a nuclear war between the U.S. and the Soviet Union. The world breathed a sigh of relief, unaware of the catastrophic consequences that could have occurred had the torpedo been launched. Thanks to the bravery and level-headedness of Vasily Arkhipov, the world was saved from the brink of destruction, and the lesson was clear. Nuclear energy is a force that requires the input of many, not the sole responsibility of one. Chapter 1. Splitting the Atom. Okay, imagine you have a pile of dominoes. You know how when you push one over, it knocks the next one down, and that one knocks the next one, and so on until all the dominoes have fallen? Well, a nuclear chain reaction is kind of like that, but with atoms instead of dominoes. Atoms are tiny particles that make up everything around us, like the air we breathe and the things we touch. Some types of atoms are called radioactive, because they can break apart and release a lot of energy. When one radioactive atom breaks apart, it releases some energy and also some tiny particles called neutrons. Now, here is where the chain reaction comes in. If one of those neutrons hits another radioactive atom, that atom will also break apart and release more energy and more neutrons. And then those neutrons can hit other atoms, and so on, like a chain reaction of falling dominoes. If you have a lot of radioactive atoms close together, you can create a lot of energy in a very short amount of time. That's what happens in a nuclear reactor or a nuclear bomb. The Potsdam Conference. The Potsdam Conference, convened in 1945 amidst the wreckage of Europe, was a pivotal moment in human history, for it was here that the leaders of the world grappled with the reality of the nuclear age. As the Allied powers deliberated on the fate of a shattered continent, President Truman received news of the successful atomic bomb test, and with it, the power to end the war with Japan. As the Allied leaders debated the ongoing war with Japan, President Truman revealed the success of the atomic bomb test. Truman saw this as a means to swiftly end the war, which had already claimed countless lives and caused immense destruction. The leaders, including British Prime Minister Winston Churchill and Soviet Premier Joseph Stalin, agreed to issue a warning to Japan, demanding its unconditional surrender, and threatened to use the atomic bomb if Japan did not comply. On August 6, 1945, the United States dropped the first atomic bomb on the Japanese city of Hiroshima, causing widespread destruction and killing an estimated 140,000 people, mostly civilians. 3 days later, another bomb was dropped on Nagasaki, killing an estimated 70,000 people. The use of the atomic bomb was a contentious decision, with some justifying it as necessary to end the war quickly and save lives, while others condemned it as a disproportionate use of force and a war crime. The Potsdam Conference marked the beginning of the nuclear age, with the destructive power of the atomic bomb raising profound ethical, moral, and strategic questions that continue to shape our world today. But in order to understand what made this moment possible, we must go back even further. The Manhattan Project. In the early 1940s, the world was at war, and the race was on to develop the most devastating weapon the world had ever seen, the atomic bomb. The Manhattan Project was a top-secret research effort led by the United States to develop this powerful weapon before the enemy could. The project brought together some of the greatest scientific minds of the time, including Albert Einstein and Enrico Fermi, who worked tirelessly to unlock the secrets of nuclear energy. Their efforts culminated in the Trinity test, the first successful test of an atomic bomb, which took place on July 16, 1945, in the New Mexico desert. The Manhattan Project was one of the largest and most expensive research and development projects in history. The exact cost of the project is difficult to calculate, as much of the spending was done in secret and many records have been lost or destroyed. However, it is estimated that the total cost of the Manhattan Project was around $2 billion, which would be equivalent to roughly $30 billion today. The vast majority of the funding for the project came from the U.S. government, with support from the British government as well. The funds were used to support a wide range of research and development activities, including the construction of research facilities and the acquisition of equipment and materials. The cost of the Manhattan Project was not only financial, but also had significant human and environmental costs. The project employed tens of thousands of people, many of whom were exposed to radiation and other health risks. There were also several accidents and incidents at the project sites, including the infamous Demon Core accident that killed 2 scientists in 1945. The Demon Core accident was a critical event that occurred during a research experiment at the Los Alamos Laboratory in New Mexico on August 21, 1945. The experiment involved the use of a subcritical mass of plutonium, which was surrounded by neutron-reflecting material in order to study the behavior of the material under different conditions. During the experiment, one of the scientists accidentally dropped a tungsten carbide brick onto the plutonium core, causing it to become supercritical and release a burst of radiation. The scientist, Harry Daghlian, was working alone and was unable to remove the brick in time to prevent exposure. Daghlian was exposed to a lethal dose of radiation and died 25 days later from radiation sickness. The incident was kept classified at the time, and only a handful of people knew about it. Less than a year later, a similar criticality accident occurred involving another subcritical mass of plutonium at Los Alamos, which also resulted in a fatal dose of radiation. This second incident was known as the Slotkin incident, after the scientist involved, Louis Slotkin. But what actually happened to those men? Ionizing radiation, like millions of microscopic bullets, tears the human cellular structure apart. The skin then begins to blister, turns red, and then black. This is followed by a latency period during which the immediate effects subside and a patient will appear to be recovering, but they aren't. This normally lasts only for 48 hours, after which the cellular damage begins to manifest. The bone marrow dies, the immune system fails, and organs and soft tissues begin to decompose. Arteries and veins spill open with millions of microscopic holes, to the point that there is no longer even the ability to deliver pain relief. The Demon Core accident and the Slotkin incident were significant reminders of the dangers and risks associated with nuclear research and development, and they highlighted the need for strict safety protocols and training in handling nuclear materials. Trinity Test. The Trinity Test was the first ever detonation of an atomic bomb and took place on July 16, 1945 in Alamogordo, New Mexico. The test was a critical moment in the Manhattan Project as it marked the culmination of years of research and development aimed at creating a viable weapon based on nuclear fission. The test involved the detonation of a plutonium implosion device, which was designed to create a chain reaction of nuclear fission that would release a massive amount of energy in the form of an explosion. The device was placed atop a 100-foot steel tower and detonated remotely. The explosion created a fireball that was visible for miles, and the shockwave was felt more than 100 miles away. The energy released by the explosion was equivalent to approximately 20 kilotons of TNT, and it left a crater 2,400 feet in diameter and 10 feet deep. The Trinity test was a success from a technical standpoint, as it demonstrated that the implosion design was a viable means of creating a nuclear explosion. The success of the test paved the way for the use of atomic bombs against Japan just a few weeks later. Oppenheimer. J. Robert Oppenheimer played a critical role in the development of the atomic bomb and the Manhattan Project. As the director of the Los Alamos Laboratory, where much of the research and development for the atomic bomb was carried out, Oppenheimer was responsible for overseeing the scientific and technical aspects of the project. Oppenheimer was a brilliant physicist and a charismatic leader who was highly respected by his colleagues. He played a key role in bringing together the diverse group of scientists and engineers who worked on the project and in guiding their efforts towards a common goal. Despite his central role in the development of the atomic bomb, Oppenheimer was also deeply conflicted about its use. He was aware of the destructive power of the bomb and the devastating impact it could have on civilian populations. In fact, he famously said after the Trinity test, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." After the war, Oppenheimer became a vocal opponent of the further development and use of nuclear weapons, and he was a leading advocate for international control and disarmament. His views and actions ultimately led to his falling out of favor with the U.S. government during the Cold War, and he was even stripped of his security clearance. Avoiding Operation Downfall. After leaving his counterparts at Potsdam and halfway across the Atlantic, Truman was faced with two devastating options, both of which were inherited from his late predecessor, FDR. The first was the already planned Operation Downfall. This was to be the undisputed largest invasion landing in world history, with the combined Allied war effort now focused on finishing the war in the Pacific. X-Day would take place on the 1st of November, 1945, with 42 carriers, 24 battleships, and 400 destroyers. Over 2 million Allied soldiers would land across 35 beachheads and launch attacks towards the targets of Kyushu and Honshu. On the Japanese side, Kyushu had been prepared in a similar fashion to Okinawa, with over 900,000 men lying in wait and over 4,000 kamikaze aircraft zeroed in on the American fleet. It is estimated that over 1,000 men would have died daily, and over twice that many on the side of the Japanese. At the same time, the Soviet Union, after devastating Manchuria, would have moved on to occupy all of Korea, where they would then be given lift from the U.S. Navy. The conquest was projected to be slow, with the two crushing forces like a vice not reaching their objective until 1947. In the end, forecasts suggested that the Allies would have lost over 1 million men, with the Japanese losing 5 million to 10 million. It is hard to believe that a single city would have remained, and once the conquering forces arrived in Tokyo, a separation similar to Berlin would inevitably take place, with a communist north and a capitalist south. This was option one. The second option was the bomb, and as we know, he chose the latter. This is how it unfolded. The atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima on August 6, 1945. In the immediate impact, the bomb exploded with a force equivalent to 15,000 tons of TNT, creating a massive fireball and shockwave that destroyed everything within a radius of 1.6 kilometers from the epicenter. An estimated 70,000 people were killed instantly, and another 70,000 were injured. The explosion released a large amount of radioactive material into the air, which settled on the ground as fallout. This caused many more deaths and illnesses in the days and weeks following the bombing. The blast knocked out communications infrastructure, so it took some time for news of the bombing to reach the outside world. The Japanese government initially denied that the bombing had taken place, but when the evidence became overwhelming, they were forced to acknowledge it. However, they still refused to surrender, hoping to hold out for better terms. The second atomic bomb was dropped on Nagasaki on August 9, 1945, killing an estimated 40,000 people and injuring tens of thousands more. On August 15, 1945, Emperor Hirohito announced Japan's surrender in a radio broadcast. This marked the end of World War II and the beginning of the Cold War. Chapter 2. MAD. Mad. How can one truly understand MAD, when in reality it resulted from a world where the deaf were attempting to speak to the blind? MAD, or Mutual Assured Destruction, was the state of play between the United States and the Soviet Union for much of the Cold War, beginning in the 1960s. The doctrine worked on the assumption that with both the United States and the Soviet Union possessing nuclear weapons capable of destroying each other entirely, neither country would dare to launch a first strike attack. The doctrine was, and in most respects still is, grounded in the idea that the possession of sufficient nuclear weapons by each side would serve as a deterrent against an attack by the other side, creating a balance of terror. According to the MAD doctrine, the United States and the Soviet Union each maintained a second strike capability, meaning that even if one side were to launch a first strike attack, the other side would still have enough nuclear weapons left to launch a devastating counterattack, thus ensuring mutually assured destruction. As a result of this doctrine, both countries continued to build up their nuclear arsenals throughout the Cold War, resulting in an arms race and an increase in tension between the two superpowers. A president's options. As the Commander-in-Chief of the United States Armed Forces, the President has the ultimate authority over the country's nuclear arsenal. What might come as a shock to many, nuclear weapons do not fall under the control of the military, and never have been. So when facing a crisis, all authority boils down to one individual. The President's options in regard to nuclear weapons include preemptive strike. The President has the option to order a preemptive nuclear strike against an enemy that possesses an imminent threat to the United States or its allies. Launch on warning. This option involves launching a nuclear strike in response to an imminent attack on the United States, as detected by early warning systems. Under the launch on warning policy, the President would have only a matter of minutes to decide whether to launch a counterattack, based on information provided by early warning systems such as satellites and radar. The decision would have to be made quickly, and would be based on incomplete information, as the incoming attack may not yet fully be identified or verified. Retaliation. The President can authorize a retaliatory nuclear strike in response to a nuclear attack or another catastrophic attack on the United States or its allies. In addition to these three options, one must be aware of the Cold War military doctrine of shoot 'em or lose 'em. This refers to the practice of launching nuclear weapons quickly in the event of an impending attack, rather than waiting for the enemy's attack to hit first. The idea was that if the US waited too long, its nuclear arsenal could be destroyed by a surprise attack from the Soviet Union. Therefore, to ensure the survivability of their nuclear weapons, the US military maintained a constant state of alert, with bombers and missiles on standby, ready to launch at a moment's notice. While this doctrine was aimed at preventing a surprise attack and ensuring the survival of the US nuclear arsenal, it also increased the risk of accidental nuclear war or escalation. However, with the surprise attack on Pearl Harbor only 4 years removed, the doctrine maintained strong support. This fact would also ring true in the Soviet Union, with the rival superpower suffering a similar blow with Operation Barbarossa at the hand of the Nazis. The doctrine was eventually phased out in the 1990s with the end of the Cold War, but the U.S. still maintains a nuclear triad of land-based missiles, submarine-launched missiles, and strategic bombers capable of launching a nuclear attack if needed. Now that we are aware of the president's options as well as some of the terminology, let's get into understanding the buildup. In order to do this and impress upon the tit-for-tat nature of the arms race, I will be exploring the Cold War leadership in the following order: Truman, Stalin, Eisenhower, Khrushchev, Kennedy, Brezhnev, Nixon, Reagan, and Gorbachev. Please be aware that while this is not every leader of the Cold War period, their absence will not detract from the concept I am attempting to explain. Truman, 1945 to 1953. During President Truman's tenure, the U.S. successfully tested and used 2 atomic bombs against Japan in 1945. However, at that time, the U.S. did not yet have the capability to deliver a nuclear weapon using long-range bombers or missiles. The U.S. Air Force was still in the process of developing these capabilities. In terms of the total number of nuclear weapons, the U.S. possessed a monopoly on nuclear weapons from 1945 until 1949. When the Soviet Union successfully tested its first atomic bomb. It is worth noting at this time the degree of separation the United States nuclear arsenal had from the military. Truman distrusted the use of the bomb by any one general, so instead gave sole authority to the commander-in-chief. The nuclear weapons were to be under the jurisdiction of the Department of Energy and separate from the military, ensuring that the 2 parts would not combine to form the bomb until the actual deployment. By the end of Truman's presidency in 1953, the U.S. had built up a stockpile of around 1,000 nuclear warheads. The U.S. had also begun developing thermonuclear weapons, hydrogen bombs, which were many times more powerful than the atomic bombs used in World War II. The first successful test of a hydrogen bomb by the U.S. occurred in 1952, during Truman's second term. The main difference between an atomic bomb and a thermonuclear bomb is the way in which they produce energy. An atomic bomb, also known as a fission bomb, works by splitting apart heavy atomic nuclei, such as uranium or plutonium, into smaller nuclei, releasing a huge amount of energy in the process. This process is called nuclear fission. On the other hand, a thermonuclear bomb, also known as a hydrogen bomb, uses a 2-stage process to produce energy. The first stage of a thermonuclear bomb is an atomic bomb, which is used to create the high temperatures and pressures necessary to start a fusion reaction. Fusion involves combining light atomic nuclei, such as hydrogen, to form heavier nuclei, releasing even more energy than nuclear fission. Thermonuclear bombs are much more powerful than atomic bombs, with yields ranging from several hundred kilotons to tens of megatons of TNT. In comparison, the yield of the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima in 1945 was around 15 kilotons of TNT. Stalin, 1949 to 1953. Stalin inherited the Soviet Union's nuclear program from his predecessor, Vladimir Lenin, and the early work on Soviet nuclear weapons began in the late 1930s. However, the program was disrupted by World War II, and it wasn't until after the war that it picked up steam again. In 1949, the Soviet Union successfully detonated its first atomic bomb, called First Lightning, or Joe 1 by the West. The bomb was a plutonium implosion device similar to the design of the atomic bombs dropped on Japan. The Soviet Union's development of nuclear weapons was greatly aided by espionage, particularly the work of spies like Klaus Fuchs and Theodore Hall, who passed secrets about the American and British nuclear programs to the Soviets. After the success of their first atomic bomb, the Soviet Union continued to develop and test more advanced nuclear weapons, including thermonuclear devices. In 1953, just after Stalin's death, the Soviet Union successfully detonated its first thermonuclear bomb, nicknamed Joe 4 by the West. The device was a multi-stage hydrogen bomb, which used the energy from a fission explosion to ignite a fusion reaction. The yield of the Joe 4 bomb was estimated to be around 400 kilotons, making it much more powerful than any previous Soviet nuclear weapon. Overall, by the time of Stalin's death in 1953, the Soviet Union had developed a significant nuclear arsenal, including both atomic and thermonuclear weapons. The exact size and competition of the Soviet nuclear arsenal at that time are unclear, but it is believed to have been smaller than the U.S. arsenal and focused more on strategic weapons than tactical weapons. Eisenhower, 1953 to 1961. During the Eisenhower presidency, the number of nuclear warheads in the U.S. arsenal increased significantly. When he took office in 1953, the U.S. had around 1,000 nuclear weapons. By the time he left office in 1961, the U.S. had an estimated 20,000 nuclear warheads, with a wide range of delivery systems including bombers and missiles. This massive increase in nuclear weapons was in part due to Eisenhower's policy of massive retaliation, which emphasized the use of nuclear weapons as a deterrent against potential Soviet aggression. Intercontinental ballistic missiles, ICBMs. The United States had deployed several types of ICBMs, which were long-range missiles capable of reaching targets thousands of miles away. These missiles carried nuclear warheads and were designed to be launched from silos on land or from submarines at sea. This development of these 24-hour silos in a constant state of readiness made it completely impractical to continue Truman's vision of a separate bomb component safeguard. Thus, the model changed to where now the military would request a bomb, the Department of Energy would enrich the matter for the warhead, and then it would flow to the possession of the military to await the president's orders. Strategic bombers. The United States had a fleet of strategic bombers, including the B-52s, which were capable of carrying nuclear bombs and could reach targets deep inside enemy territory. Nuclear strategy. Eisenhower also oversaw the development of nuclear strategy, including the concept of massive retaliation, which held that any attack on the United States or its allies would result in a massive nuclear response. This strategy was designed to deter Soviet aggression and prevent a nuclear war. Khrushchev, 1953 to 1964. It is estimated that by the early 1960s, the Soviet Union had around 200 nuclear warheads, while the United States had around 5,000. By the end of Khrushchev's leadership in 1964, the Soviet Union had significantly increased its nuclear arsenal, with estimates ranging from 200 to 1,000 warheads. In addition, the USSR had successfully tested intercontinental ballistic missiles, ICBMs, that could deliver nuclear warheads to the United States. Moreover, the Soviet Union had developed a nuclear submarine program and was able to launch ballistic missiles from submarines. This increased the Soviet Union's nuclear capabilities and provided a second strike capability for the first time. This meant that even if the United States were to launch a first strike nuclear attack, the USSR would still have the ability to retaliate and cause significant damage. This was the moment when America lost its monopoly and MAD began. By 1962, the Soviet Union had an estimated 40 to 50 intercontinental ballistic missiles capable of reaching the United States, as well as a significant number of shorter-range missiles capable of striking targets in Europe, in particular, Berlin. Finally, the Soviet Union had now developed a competent nuclear bomber force, the Tu-95 Bear bomber, capable of carrying nuclear bombs, was in service with the Soviet Air Force, and the USSR had begun developing a supersonic strategic bomber, the Tu-22. Kennedy, 1961 to 1963. During John F. Kennedy's presidency, the United States possessed a significant nuclear arsenal, including both strategic and tactical nuclear weapons. The country's nuclear capabilities had been rapidly expanding during the Cold War, and Kennedy inherited an already substantial stockpile of nuclear weapons from his predecessor, Dwight D. Eisenhower. At the beginning of Kennedy's presidency in 1961, the United States had approximately 5,000 nuclear warheads, with a range of yields and delivery systems. This included intercontinental ballistic missiles, ICBMs, submarine-launched ballistic missiles, SLBMs, and strategic bombers. One of the most significant developments during Kennedy's presidency was the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962. The Soviet Union had installed nuclear missiles in Cuba, which were capable of reaching the United States. Kennedy responded with a naval blockade of Cuba, and after a tense standoff, the Soviet Union agreed to remove the missiles on the condition that the United States would never invade Cuba and that ballistic missiles be removed from Turkey. It cannot be overstated that there was a significant risk of nuclear war between the two superpowers during the crisis. However, both sides did recognize the need for better communication channels to avoid a similar crisis in the future. As a result, a direct communication hotline was established between the White House and the Kremlin to allow for quick and direct communication between the leaders of the U.S. and USSR. This hotline was established in August 1963, several months after the Cuban Missile Crisis ended. Additionally, the two sides began to engage in more diplomatic efforts to reduce tensions and address areas of conflict, such as the Partial Nuclear Test Ban Treaty signed in 1963. While there were still moments of tension between the U.S. and USSR, such as the Berlin Crisis of 1961, overall, communication and diplomatic efforts between the two nations improved after the Cuban Missile Crisis. Finally, it is worth noting that by 1963, just before Kennedy's assassination, the U.S. began deploying Polaris submarines armed with nuclear-tipped ballistic missiles. This was a significant advancement in the country's second strike capability, as the submarines could remain hidden for months and survive a first strike attack. Chapter 3. Duck and Cover. The American people found themselves in a world where the threat of nuclear annihilation hung over their heads like the sword of Damocles. As the 1950s dawned, a new era of fear and uncertainty swept through the nation, and the people looked to their leaders for guidance. It was in these times of trepidation that the United States government created an educational film, a short yet powerful flicker of moving images that aimed to teach the children of America how to protect themselves from the terrible force of nuclear explosions. This film, dear listener, was known as Duck and Cover. Duck and cover, cried Bert the Turtle, the animated star of this cinematic gem. The children in the film mimicked his actions, diving under desks and covering their heads with their hands, as if such simple gestures could shield them from the devastating effects of nuclear war. It was a naive and innocent time, and many believed that these actions would keep them safe. As the years went by, the fear of nuclear war began to seep into the very fabric of American culture. Families built fallout shelters in their backyards, stocking them with canned food and water in case the dreaded day came when the sirens wailed and the missiles fell from the sky. Newspapers and magazines published countless articles about the looming threat, and the airwaves were filled with the voices of experts and politicians debating the merits of disarmament and deterrence. I know not with what weapons World War III might be fought, but World War IV will be fought with sticks and stones, mused the brilliant physicist Albert Einstein, capturing the essence of the growing unease. By the 1960s, the fear of nuclear war had become an integral part of the American psyche. The Cuban Missile Crisis brought the world to the brink of disaster, and the people held their breath, praying that the conflict would be resolved before it escalated into a full-blown war. It was during this time that the famous singer-songwriter Bob Dylan captured the mood of the nation with his haunting words, "How many times must the cannonballs fly before they're forever banned?" The answer, my friend, is blowing in the wind. As the Cold War continued throughout the 1970s and 1980s, the American people grew weary of living under the constant threat of nuclear annihilation. Protests against the arms race and the proliferation of nuclear weapons became more and more common, with ordinary citizens calling for an end to the madness. The 1983 television movie The Day After brought the horrific reality of nuclear war to the homes of millions of Americans, driving home the message that such a conflict would have no winners, only survivors. Radiation. As the power of atomic weapons seeped into the collective consciousness, citizens began to ponder the invisible enemy that could wreak havoc upon their lives and the world as they knew it. This enemy was radiation, an unseen, odorless, and tasteless force that could cause devastating illnesses, mutations, and even death. The fear of this invisible menace spread like wildfire, and the people sought answers and reassurance from their leaders. The government, recognizing the importance of addressing the concerns of its citizens, launched a series of public information campaigns to educate the masses about the risks of radiation and how to protect themselves from its harmful effects. Pamphlets and posters depicting the dangers of radiation were distributed far and wide, while radio and television programs echoed the message that vigilance and preparedness were key to safeguarding the populace. Meanwhile, the scientific community delved into the mysteries of radiation, striving to learn more about its effects on human health and the environment. As their understanding grew, so too did their awareness of the need for caution and the importance of protecting the public from the dangers of radiation exposure. The state responded to these concerns by introducing legislation and regulations aimed at minimizing the risk of radiation exposure. Strict guidelines were established for the handling and disposal of radioactive materials, while the construction of nuclear power plants was closely monitored to ensure the safety of nearby communities. In an effort to calm the nerves of a worried nation, the government also funded the development of advanced technology designed to detect and measure radiation levels. This investment led to the creation of devices such as the Geiger counter, which allowed individuals and organizations to monitor their environment for signs of radiation. As the years passed, the American public became more knowledgeable about the risks of radiation and the importance of taking precautions to protect themselves and their loved ones. The government continued to invest in research and education, fostering a culture of safety and preparedness that would serve the nation well as it navigated the turbulent waters of the Cold War and beyond. Behind the Iron Curtain. In the land far beyond the Iron Curtain, where the hammer and sickle flew high above the Soviet Union, the people faced the very same specter that haunted their American counterparts, the chilling possibility of nuclear war and the invisible enemy of radiation. From the 1950s to the 1990s, as the Cold War raged on, the Soviet public grappled with their fears and anxieties, just as the world beyond their borders did. In the early days of this epic struggle between the two superpowers, Soviet citizens were often bombarded with propaganda that painted a rosy picture of their nation's strength and invincibility. "Our cause is just," they were told, "and we are destined to triumph over the capitalist West." But as the years wore on, the Soviet people began to glimpse the harsh reality of the potential consequences of nuclear war. One such voice that captured the growing concerns was that of Soviet writer Yevgeny Yevtushenko. In his poem, The Heirs of Stalin, Yevtushenko wrote, "We are condemned to hope, but let it be a bitter hope, like the taste of wormwood, let it be a difficult hope, and let no one know of our hope but ourselves, and let us only hope, only hope. These words resonated with many of his fellow citizens who began to recognize that the threat of nuclear war was not just a distant, abstract concept, but a real and present danger. As the decades progressed, the Soviet government attempted to assuage its people's fears through various means, including public information campaigns and education programs that focused on civil defense and preparedness. Schools and workplaces conducted drills similar to the duck and cover exercises in the United States, teaching citizens how to react in the event of a nuclear attack. In addition to these efforts, the Soviet government pursued diplomatic channels, engaging in negotiations and treaties with the United States in an attempt to limit the proliferation of nuclear weapons and reduce the risk of an all-out war. One such leader who took an active role in these efforts was the last General Secretary of the Soviet Union, Mikhail Gorbachev. He famously said, "We are living in an interdependent world, and what is happening in one part of the world sooner or later affects other parts." Throughout the cold and arduous years of the Cold War, the Soviet public faced the grim reality of nuclear war and the terrifying threat of radiation. Yet, just like their American counterparts, they demonstrated remarkable resilience and adaptability, finding solace in their communities and striving to build a future free from the specter of nuclear annihilation. Chapter 4. Testing the Limits. Let's take stock of what we know so far. 1. The basics of an atomic bomb. 2. The origins of the technological breakthrough. 3. The concerns around its use early on. 4. The rationale behind recognizing these concerns and still pushing forward into a state of mutually assured destruction. 5. Finally, how the public reacted and subsequently the state's response. To delve deeper, Chapter 4 will address testing the limits of nuclear weapons technology. Specifically, we will explore the following questions. 1. How did each nation test these new devices? 2. Were the tests conducted in a manner that respected the risks felt by the public? 3. Why did the testing ultimately fizzle out by the close of the 20th century? United States. The dawn of atomic testing can be traced back to the Manhattan Project, a top-secret research and development endeavor during World War II that culminated in the creation of the first atomic bombs. Fueled by a desire to end the war and fear that Nazi Germany might develop similar weapons, the United States embarked on a perilous path that would forever change the world. Following the end of World War II, the United States continued to develop and test nuclear weapons, driven by an arms race with the Soviet Union and a desire to maintain a strategic advantage. The U.S. conducted over 1,000 nuclear tests between 1945 and 1992, many of them at the Nevada Test Site and the Pacific Proving Grounds. January 31, 1950. President Harry S. Truman announces the decision to develop the hydrogen bomb. November 1, 1952. The United States conducts its first successful hydrogen bomb test, codenamed Ivy Mike, at the Eniwetok Atoll in the Marshall Islands. August 5, 1963. The United States, Soviet Union, and the United Kingdom signed the Limited Test Ban Treaty, prohibiting nuclear testing in the atmosphere, underwater, and in outer space. September 23, 1992. The United States conducts its last nuclear test, codenamed Divider, at the Nevada Test Site. The U.S. nuclear testing program had far-reaching consequences, both domestically and internationally. The tests led to significant advancements in nuclear weapons technology, but they also left a lasting legacy of environmental contamination and health issues for those exposed to radiation. Thousands of people, including military personnel, test site workers, and civilians living downwind of the test sites, suffered from radiation exposure and related health problems, such as cancer and birth defects. For example, Let us turn our attention to one particularly poignant example where civilians were affected by nuclear testing: the tragic story of the downwinders in the United States. During the 1950s and 1960s, the United States conducted numerous atmospheric nuclear tests at the Nevada test site. Prevailing winds carried radioactive fallout from these tests across vast distances, impacting civilians living downwind of the testing grounds in communities across the American Southwest. These downwinders were exposed to dangerous levels of radiation, unknowingly and often without warning. This exposure to radiation had devastating consequences for the health and well-being of the affected communities. Many of the downwinders developed various forms of cancer, particularly thyroid cancer, as well as other radiation-related illnesses. Tragically, numerous families also experienced increased rates of birth defects and miscarriages as a result of the radioactive fallout. The plight of the downwinders became a rallying cry for greater transparency and accountability in the nuclear testing program, as well as for compensation and support for those affected by the fallout. In response, the United States government eventually enacted the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act in 1990, which provided financial compensation to individuals and families who could prove they were harmed by the nuclear tests. In addition to the health concern, U.S. nuclear testing and the arms race with the Soviet Union contributed to global tensions and fears of nuclear war during the Cold War. However, as tests continued, the destructive power and the risks associated with nuclear weapons led to increased efforts to control their proliferation and promote disarmament, culminating in treaties such as the Limited Test Ban Treaty, the Non-Proliferation Treaty, and the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. This sentiment is captured in a 1961 address to the United Nations General Assembly by President John F. Kennedy. We seek to strengthen the United Nations, to help solve its financial problems, to make it a more effective instrument for peace, to develop it into a genuine world security system, a system capable of resolving disputes on the basis of law, of ensuring the security of the large and the small, and of creating conditions under which arms can finally be abolished. Soviet Union. The Soviet Union's journey into the world of nuclear weaponry was ignited by the United States' atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945. In response, Joseph Stalin launched a secret program to develop their own atomic bomb. Driven by a desire to achieve strategic parity and a fear of falling behind in the nuclear arms race, the Soviet Union embarked on a path that would have profound consequences for decades to come. We will catch up and overtake America. Nikita Khrushchev, first Secretary of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, 1957. Between 1949 and 1990, the Soviet Union conducted over 700 nuclear tests, many of them at the Semipalatinsk test site in present-day Kazakhstan and the Novaya Zemlya archipelago in the Arctic Ocean. These tests aim to develop and refine their arsenal of nuclear weapons. August 29, 1949, the Soviet Union successfully conducts its first atomic bomb test, code-named First Lightning, or RDS-1, at the Semipalatinsk test site. November 22, 1955, the Soviet Union carries out its first successful hydrogen bomb test, codenamed RDS-37, at the Semipalatinsk test site. October 30, 1961, the Tsar Bomba, the largest nuclear weapon ever detonated, is tested by the Soviet Union at the Novaya Zemlya site. October 24, 1990, the Soviet Union conducts its last nuclear test, codename Kraten-3, at the Novaya Zemlya test site. In regards to health and safety concerns, let's explore yet another example of civilians affected by nuclear testing in the Soviet Union, the story of the people living near the Semipalatinsk test site, also known as the Polygon. Located in present-day Kazakhstan, the Semipalatinsk test site was the primary location for the Soviet Union's nuclear weapons testing program, with more than 450 tests conducted between 1949 and 1989. Many of these tests were carried out above ground or in the atmosphere, releasing large amounts of radioactive fallout that spread across the region. The civilians living in the vicinity of the test site, particularly those in villages and towns downwind of the explosions, were exposed to dangerous levels of radiation. These innocent people, unaware of the true extent of the danger they faced, suffered the consequences of the radioactive fallout in the form of severe health issues. Many of those affected developed various forms of cancer, particularly thyroid cancer, as well as other radiation-related illnesses. Tragically, numerous families experienced developmental disorders and miscarriages as a result of the radioactive contamination. Moreover, the environment surrounding the test site was significantly damaged, with long-lasting effects on the land, water, and wildlife. As awareness of the health and environmental consequences of the Semipalatinsk test site grew, so too did calls for transparency, accountability, and compensation for the affected communities. In the years following the collapse of the Soviet Union, the newly independent nation of Kazakhstan took steps to address these concerns, including closing the test site in 1991 and working with international organizations to help the affected communities and remediate the contaminated land. United Kingdom. The United Kingdom's journey into the realm of nuclear weaponry was driven by a desire to maintain its status as a global power and to develop an independent nuclear deterrent in the face of rising tensions between the United States and the Soviet Union during the early years of the Cold War. The atomic bomb is the most powerful weapon ever produced, and its use by Britain would be entirely defensive. Prime Minister Clement Attlee, in a 1945 address to the House of Commons. Between 1952 and 1991, the United Kingdom conducted a total of 45 nuclear tests, primarily in collaboration with the United States and Australia. These tests took place at various locations, including Montebello Islands and Maralinga in Australia, as well as the Nevada test site in the United States. October 3, 1952. The United Kingdom successfully conducts its first atomic bomb test, codenamed Operation Hurricane, at the Montebello Islands off the coast of Western Australia. November 8, 1957. The United Kingdom carries out its first successful hydrogen bomb test, codenamed Operation Grapple X, at Christmas Island in the Pacific Ocean. March 26, 1963. The United Kingdom, United States, and Soviet Union sign a partial test ban treaty prohibiting atmospheric, underwater, and outer space nuclear tests. November 26, 1991. The United Kingdom conducts its final nuclear test, codenamed Julian, at the Nevada test site in the United States. Similar to the United States and the Soviet Union, the nuclear tests conducted by the United Kingdom led to radiation exposure and related health problems for military personnel, test site workers, and civilians living near the test sites, particularly in Australia. Located in the remote South Australian outback, Maralinga was the site of 7 British nuclear tests between 1956 and 1957, known collectively as Operation Buffalo and Operation Antler. In addition to these tests, a series of minor trials were conducted between 1953 and 1963, which involved the dispersal of radioactive materials. The indigenous populations and local communities living in the vicinity of the Maralinga test site were profoundly affected by these nuclear tests. Radioactive fallout contaminated the land, water, and air, posing significant health risks to those who were exposed. Many of the indigenous people in the area, including the Inagu Pitjantjara and Yankujara peoples, were forcibly removed from their ancestral lands in the lead up to the tests. However, some remained in the area or returned prematurely, unaware of the dangers posed by the residual radiation. The long-term health consequences for the affected communities were severe, with increased rates of cancer, respiratory illness, and other radiation-related diseases. The environmental impact was also devastating, with large swaths of land rendered uninhabitable and vital resources, such as water resources, contaminated for generations. In the years following the nuclear tests, the Australian government and the British government faced mounting pressure to address the health and environmental consequences of the Maralinga tests. A series of investigations, including the 1984 to 1985 Royal Commission into British Nuclear Tests in Australia, eventually led to the Australian government receiving financial compensation from the United Kingdom for the cleanup and rehabilitation of the Maralinga test site. It is worth noting that the decision of the Australian government to allow nuclear testing on its soil is a complex tale, shaped by a myriad of political, strategic, and economic factors. In the early 1950s, the United Kingdom was actively searching for suitable locations to conduct its nuclear tests. The British government approached its close ally, Australia, with a request to use its vast remote territories for this purpose. Australia, led by Prime Minister Robert Menzies, agreed to the British request, and thus began a partnership that would last for over a decade. Several key factors influenced the Australian government's decision to permit British nuclear testing. Political and strategic alliance. Australia shared a strong bond with the United Kingdom, dating back to their colonial past and common membership in the British Commonwealth. As an ally of the United Kingdom and the United States during the Cold War, Australia saw the development of a British nuclear deterrent as an essential counterbalance to the perceived Soviet threat. By facilitating British nuclear tests, Australia sought to strengthen its alliance and ensure its own security. Economic considerations. The Australian government hoped that its support for British nuclear testing would result in economic benefits, such as increased trade and investment from the United Kingdom, as well as access to advanced technologies and scientific expertise. The tests also provided employment opportunities for Australians in the remote areas where the tests were conducted. National prestige. At the time, the development of nuclear weapons was seen as an indicator of a nation's scientific prowess and global standing. By hosting British nuclear tests, the Australian government sought to elevate its international profile and demonstrate its commitment to the Western Alliance. However, as the devastating consequences of nuclear testing on the environment and public health became more apparent over time, public opinion in Australia began to shift. Growing concerns about the impact of nuclear testing on Indigenous communities, the environment, and Australia's international reputation led to increased scrutiny and ultimately the end of British nuclear testing in the country. In retrospect, the Australian government's decision to allow nuclear testing on its soil was a product of the political, strategic, and economic imperatives of the time. The unfolding story of this decision and its repercussions serves as a sobering reminder of the complex interplay between national interests and global responsibilities that shaped the nuclear era. The United Kingdom's pursuit of an independent nuclear deterrent also contributed to global tensions and the arms race during the Cold War. However, as a member of the NATO alliance, the UK's nuclear arsenal also served to strengthen the collective security of the West against potential Soviet aggression. The risks associated with nuclear weapons led to increased efforts to control their proliferation and promote disarmament, with the United Kingdom playing an active role in the negotiation of treaties such as the Partial Test Ban Treaty, the Non-Proliferation Treaty, and the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. We must learn to live together as brothers, or we will perish together as fools. Prime Minister Harold Macmillan in a 1960 speech to the United Nations General Assembly. It is clear that British nuclear testing featured a complex interplay of power, security, and responsibility, a nation trying to preserve its prestige but also its relevance and sovereignty, while at the same time doing so at the expense of former colonies. France. The impetus for France's nuclear testing program stemmed from a desire to assert its status as an independent global power and to develop a nuclear deterrent, or force de frappe, in response to the escalating tensions of the Cold War. France cannot be France without greatness. President Charles de Gaulle articulating his vision for a strong and independent France. Between 1960 and 1996, France conducted a total of 210 nuclear tests, primarily at its test site in Algeria and French Polynesia. February 13, 1960. France successfully conducts its first atomic bomb test, codename Gerbois Bleu, in the Algerian Sahara. June 17, 1967, France carries out its first thermonuclear bomb test, codename Canopus, in French Polynesia. 1974, France moves all nuclear testing underground following international pressure and the signing of the Partial Test Ban Treaty. January 27, 1996, France conducts its final nuclear test, codename Xuthos, at the Mururoa Atoll in French Polynesia. Similar to other nuclear powers, France's nuclear tests led to radiation exposure and related health problems for military personnel, test site workers, and civilians living near the test sites, particularly in Algeria and French Polynesia. The environmental impact was also significant, with lasting effects on the land, water, and wildlife in the affected areas. Let us now delve into a specific example of civilians affected by French nuclear testing, the story of the Tahitian population and local communities near the Mururoa and Fangataufa atolls in French Polynesia. The Mururoa and Fangataufa atolls, situated in the South Pacific, were the primary locations for French nuclear tests from 1966 to 1996. Over this period, France conducted 193 nuclear tests in the region, both atmospheric and underground. The Tahitian population and local communities living in the vicinity of the test sites were exposed to radioactive fallout from the nuclear tests, especially during the period of atmospheric testing between 1966 and 1974. The radioactive contamination affected the land, water, and marine life, posing serious health risks to those who were exposed. Many inhabitants of the affected areas reported an increase in cancer cases, particularly thyroid cancer and other radiation-related illnesses. Additionally, the environmental impact of the French nuclear tests was severe. The detonations caused extensive damage to the coral reefs surrounding the atolls, which led to long-lasting consequences for the local ecosystem and the livelihoods of the people who depended on fishing and other marine resources. In the years following the nuclear tests, the French government faced increasing pressure from the affected communities, international organizations, and other governments to address the health and environmental consequences of its actions in French Polynesia. In response, France provided some compensation to the victims and initiated efforts to monitor and remediate the contaminated sites. However, many in French Polynesia continue to demand greater transparency, accountability, and compensation for the long-term effects of the nuclear tests. France's pursuit of an independent nuclear deterrent contributed to global tensions and the arms race during the Cold War. However, as a founding member of the European Union and a key player in NATO, France's nuclear arsenal also played a role in maintaining the balance of power and promoting collective security against potential adversaries. The risks associated with nuclear weapons led to increased efforts to control their proliferation and promote disarmament, with France playing an active role in the negotiation of treaties such as the Partial Test Ban Treaty, the Non-Proliferation Treaty, and the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. Chapter 5. Setting the Limits. In this chapter, we shall journey through the efforts and impact of anti-nuclear activism during the Cold War era. We will encounter influential groups that sought to raise awareness about the dangers of nuclear weapons and campaigned for peace, disarmament, and non-proliferation. Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament, CND. There is no way to peace. Peace is the way. Bertrand Russell, philosopher and CND co-founder. Founded in the United Kingdom in 1958, The Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament quickly became one of the most prominent anti-nuclear organizations in the world. With its iconic peace symbol, the CND aimed to raise public awareness about the dangers of nuclear weapons and to pressure governments to adopt disarmament policies. While it is difficult to quantify the exact degree of impact of the Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament, it is evident that the organization played a significant role in shaping public opinion, political discourse, and cultural attitudes toward nuclear weapons and disarmament during the Cold War era and beyond. The CND mobilized thousands of people in protests, marches, and demonstrations, fostering a sense of collective action and shared responsibility in advocating for a world free from nuclear threats. In addition, it exerted significant influence on political discourse and decision-making. The organization's advocacy and activism contributed to the development and adoption of several key international treaties and arrangements, such as the Partial Test Ban Treaty, the Non-Proliferation Treaty, and the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty. SANE, National Committee for a Sane Nuclear Policy. We must shift the arms race into a peace race. Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr., civil rights leader and SANE supporter. Established in the United States in 1957, SANE was an influential anti-nuclear advocacy group that sought to educate the public about the dangers of nuclear arms and promote disarmament. The organization attracted support from prominent figures such as Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. Assessing the precise degree of impact SANE, National Committee for a Sane Nuclear Policy, can be a complex endeavor, as its influence was interconnected with broader social, political, and historical contexts. However, we can examine several key aspects of SANE's impact during the Cold War era. Firstly, SANE played a critical role in raising public awareness about the risks and consequences of nuclear weapons and the importance of disarmament. The organization facilitated dialogue and debate on nuclear policy, both in the United States and globally. By hosting events, publishing materials, and engaging with the media, SANE contributed to a growing public discourse on the need for a more rational and responsible approach to nuclear weapons. Secondly, SANE actively advocated for nuclear disarmament and arms control, lobbying policymakers and government officials to adopt more sensible nuclear policies. The organization's efforts contributed to a shift in public opinion and political discourse, creating pressure for the United States government to consider disarmament measures and engage in arms control negotiations with the Soviet Union. Thirdly, SANE served as a hub for connecting individuals, organizations, and activists with shared concerns about nuclear weapons and disarmament. The organization worked closely with other peace groups, civil rights organizations, and religious communities, fostering a sense of solidarity and collective action. This network of support amplified the message of disarmament and increased the reach and impact of SANE's efforts. European nuclear disarmament. End. We are one human race, one world, one death, one life. E.P. Thompson, historian and END co-founder. Formed in the early 1980s, European nuclear disarmament sought to create a united front against nuclear weapons across Europe. The organization aimed to bridge the divide between Eastern and Western Europe and to foster cooperation between the opposing sides of the Cold War in the pursuit of disarmament and peace. Evaluating the precise degree of impact European nuclear disarmament END is also a multifaceted task, as its influence was intricately linked to the broader social, political, and historical contexts of the Cold War era. Nonetheless, one particular area of note is its role in bridging the East-West divide. END sought to bridge the divide between Eastern and Western Europe, promoting cooperation and dialogue between the opposing sides of the Cold War. This approach helped to create an atmosphere of mutual understanding and fostered the exchange of ideas and experiences among activists, academics, and policymakers from both sides of the Iron Curtain. As a result, and contributed to the building of relationships and trust that would later play a crucial role in the eventual de-escalation of tensions between the United States and the Soviet Union. The United Nations. The United Nations, UN, has played a significant role in promoting nuclear disarmament and arms control since its inception in 1945. The organization has served as a platform for dialogue, negotiation, and the development of international treaties and agreements aimed at reducing the threat posed by nuclear weapons. Here are some key areas where the UN has been influential in the realm of nuclear disarmament. First, the UN General Assembly has consistently adopted resolutions calling for nuclear disarmament, arms control, and non-proliferation. These resolutions help set the tone for international discourse and can create pressure for member states to take action on nuclear issues. Examples include the first ever General Assembly resolution, Resolution 1, 1946, which established the goal of eliminating nuclear weapons, and the Program of Action on the Establishment of a Nuclear Weapon-Free World, Resolution 4562, 1990. Second, the UN has served as a forum for negotiating and adopting various international treaties and agreements aimed at reducing nuclear risks and promoting disarmament. Some notable examples include the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, NPT 1968, the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, CTBT 1996, and the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, TPNW 2017. Third, the UN has established various specialized bodies and institutions dedicated to promoting disarmament, arms control, and non-proliferation. For example, the United Nations Office for Disarmament Affairs, UNODA, serves as the focal point for disarmament efforts within the UN system, while the International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA, is responsible for verifying compliance with nuclear non-proliferation commitments and promoting the peaceful use of nuclear technology. From these three major considerations, one can conclude that the United Nations has played an influential role in nuclear disarmament by providing a platform for dialogue and negotiation, facilitating the development and adoption of international treaties and agreements, and establishing specialized bodies and institutions dedicated to disarmament and arms control. While progress toward complete nuclear disarmament has been slow, the UN's efforts have contributed to the reduction of nuclear risks, the strengthening of non-proliferation norms, and the promotion of a more peaceful and secure world. Now that we have evaluated the impact of groups campaigning for nuclear disarmament, it's time to critically scrutinize the achievements and limitations of the official treaties and resolutions that they got as a result of their public and political pressure. Did any treaty have a material impact on the safety around nuclear weapons, or was it all just safety theater? SALT I. The Strategic Arms Limitation Talks, SALT I, were a series of negotiations between the United States and the Soviet Union that took place from 1969 to 1972. SALT I resulted in two landmark agreements, the Anti-Ballistic Missile ABM Treaty and the Interim Agreement on the Limitation of Strategic Offensive Arms. To critically evaluate the impact of SALT I, we can examine both its achievements and limitations. Achievements. SALT I marked the beginning of détente, a period of eased tensions between the two superpowers. By engaging in negotiations and signing agreements, both sides demonstrated a willingness to cooperate on arms control and reduce the risk of a nuclear conflict. This shift in relations created a more stable strategic environment and paved the way for future arms control negotiations. The ABM Treaty limited the number of anti-ballistic missile systems that each side could deploy, restricting them to 2 sites, later reduced to 1. By curbing the development of ABM systems, the treaty maintained the concept of mutually assured destruction, MAD, and preserved strategic stability. The ABM Treaty remained in force until 2002, when the United States withdrew from it. The Interim Agreement on the Limitation of Strategic Offensive Arms, also known as the SALT I Freeze, established temporary limits on the number of strategic offensive arms, intercontinental ballistic missiles, submarine-launched ballistic missiles, and heavy bombers that each side could possess. While the agreement did not lead to a reduction in nuclear weapons, it slowed down the arms race and established a framework for future arms control negotiations. Limitations. The agreements reached during SALT I were limited in scope and did not achieve significant reductions in nuclear arsenals. The interim agreement was temporary, intended to last only until a more comprehensive treaty could be negotiated, which eventually materialized as SALT II. Moreover, the agreements did not cover all types of nuclear weapons, leaving room for the continued development of other systems not covered by the negotiations. SALT I faced challenges in terms of verifying compliance with the agreements. While both sides committed to providing data on their strategic forces and not interfering with national technical means of verification, such as satellite imagery, there were concerns about the accuracy of the data provided and the potential for cheating. Despite the limitations imposed by SALT I, the arms race continued in other areas. Both the United States and the Soviet Union continued to develop and deploy new types of nuclear weapons, such as multiple independently targetable re-entry vehicles, MIRVs, and cruise missiles, which were not covered by the SALT I agreements. In summary, SALT I was a milestone in U.S.-Soviet relations, marking the beginning of détente and paving the way for future arms control negotiations. While the agreements reached during SALT I did not result in significant reductions in nuclear arsenals, they contributed to a more stable strategic environment and demonstrated the potential for cooperation between the two superpowers. However, the limitations of SALT I, including its temporary and partial nature, verification challenges, and the continued arms race in other areas, highlight the complexities and challenges of achieving lasting progress in nuclear disarmament. SALT II, the Strategic Arms Limitation Talks II. SALT II were a series of negotiations between the United States and Soviet Union that took place from 1972 to 1979. Building upon the groundwork laid by SALT I, SALT II aimed to achieve more substantial limitations on strategic nuclear forces. The negotiations resulted in the SALT II Treaty, which was signed in June 1979. Once again, to critically evaluate the impact of SALT II, we can examine both its achievements and limitations. Achievements. SALT II expanded upon the limitations established by SALT I, setting specific caps on various types of strategic nuclear forces for both sides. The treaty placed its limits on intercontinental ballistic missiles, ICBMs, submarine-launched ballistic missiles, SLBMs, and heavy bombers. It also introduced constraints on multiple independently targetable re-entry vehicles, MIRVs, to address the concerns raised during the SALT I negotiations. SALT II improved upon the verification measures established during SALT I, including provisions for data exchange, on-site inspections, and the use of national technical means, e.g. satellite imagery, for verifying compliance with the treaty. These measures increased confidence in the ability to detect potential cheating and helped build trust between the two superpowers. The SALT II negotiations, like SALT I, contributed to the continuation of dialogue and cooperation between the United States and the Soviet Union on arms control and disarmament. This ongoing engagement helped to maintain a relatively stable strategic environment and set the stage for subsequent arms control efforts, such as the Strategic Arms Reduction Talks, START. Limitations. The SALT II Treaty faced significant opposition in the United States, primarily due to concerns about Soviet compliance and the adequacy of the treaty's verification measures. The Soviet invasion of Afghanistan in December 1979 further strained U.S.-Soviet relations, leading President Jimmy Carter to withdraw the treaty from consideration by the Senate. As a result, the SALT II Treaty was never formally ratified. Although the SALT II Treaty was never ratified, both the United States and the Soviet Union informally agreed to abide by its provisions. However, the treaty's limitations were set to expire in 1985, and both sides continued to develop and deploy new types of strategic weapons not covered by the treaty, exploiting loopholes in the agreement. The late 1970s and early 1980s saw a deterioration of U.S.-Soviet relations, with the invasion of Afghanistan, the election of President Ronald Reagan, and the deployment of intermediate-range nuclear forces in Europe. This period of heightened tensions and the failure of the SALT II Treaty to be ratified limited the potential for further progress on arms control and disarmament. In summary, SALT II represented a more ambitious attempt to limit strategic nuclear forces than its predecessor, with more comprehensive limitations and enhanced verification measures. However, the treaty's failure to be ratified, its expiration, and the continued development of new strategic weapons limited its long-term impact. While SALT II contributed to the ongoing dialogue and cooperation between the United States and the Soviet Union on arms control, the deterioration of relations between the two superpowers and the changing geopolitical landscape pose significant challenges to achieving lasting progress in nuclear disarmament. Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. The Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, NPT, is a landmark international treaty aimed at preventing the spread of nuclear weapons, promoting the peaceful use of nuclear energy, and advancing nuclear disarmament. The treaty was opened for signature in 1968 and entered into force in 1970. Achievements. The NPT has been successful in limiting the spread of nuclear weapons to a large extent. With the exception of a few countries that have not joined the treaty or have withdrawn, most nations have abided by their commitments to not pursue nuclear weapons programs. By establishing a clear legal framework and promoting a norm against nuclear proliferation, the NPT has contributed to global security and stability. The NPT has facilitated international cooperation in the peaceful use of nuclear energy, including for electricity generation, medical research, and other applications. Article 4 of the treaty guarantees the right of all member states to access nuclear technology for peaceful purposes, and the International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA, plays a vital role in facilitating the transfer of such technology. The NPT contains disarmament commitments in Article 6, which calls on nuclear weapon states to pursue negotiations in good faith toward nuclear disarmament. While progress has been slow, the NPT has provided a framework for bilateral and multilateral arms control agreements, such as the Strategic Arms Reduction Talks, START, and the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, CTBT. The NPT has facilitated the development of robust verification and monitoring mechanisms, primarily through the IAEA safeguard system. These mechanisms help ensure compliance with the treaty's non-proliferation obligations and build confidence among member states. Limitations. Critics argue that the NPT establishes unequal obligations between nuclear weapon states and non-nuclear weapon states. While non-nuclear weapon states are required to forego nuclear weapons programs, the nuclear weapon states are only obligated to pursue disarmament negotiations in good faith without a specific timeline or disarmament targets. Despite the disarmament commitments in Article 6 of the NPT, progress on nuclear disarmament has been slow and uneven. The nuclear weapon states have reduced their arsenals since the end of the Cold War, but thousands of nuclear weapons still exist, and modernization programs continue. The NPT's impact is limited by the fact that a few countries with nuclear weapons, such as India, Pakistan, and Israel, have not joined the treaty. North Korea withdrew from the NPT in 2003 and subsequently developed nuclear weapons, raising concerns about the effectiveness of the treaty in preventing proliferation. Despite the NPT's success in limiting nuclear proliferation, concerns remain about the potential for countries to pursue clandestine nuclear weapons programs or for non-state actors to acquire nuclear materials. The treaty's safeguards and verification mechanisms face ongoing challenges in addressing these risks. In summary, the NPT has had a significant impact on limiting the spread of nuclear weapons, promoting the peaceful use of nuclear energy, and providing a framework for disarmament efforts. However, the treaty faces limitations in terms of its unequal obligations, slow progress on disarmament, non-signatories and withdrawal, and ongoing proliferation risks and challenges. Despite these limitations, the NPT remains a cornerstone of the global nuclear non-proliferation and disarmament regime, contributing to a more secure and stable world. Post-Cold War progress. I will be the first to admit that treaty evaluation is not the sexiest and most action-packed aspect of the nuclear age. Therefore, if you glazed over in the last section, please be aware that the key takeaway thus far is simple. Both sides were active in responding to public concerns and made meaningful progress toward improving communication and safety. But the question now is, did that progress change after the collapse of the Soviet Union? From start to new start. In the post-Cold War world, 4 more major reduction treaties are worth our scrutiny before moving on to the final 2 chapters. Each of these treaties aim to limit and reduce the number of strategic nuclear weapons in the possession of the United States and the Soviet Union, later Russia. Start 1. Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty 1, 1991. Achievements. The largest and most complex arms control treaty in history, resulting in significant reductions in nuclear arsenals, required both the United States and Soviet Union to reduce their strategic nuclear weapons by roughly 35 to 40%. Contributed to increased stability and transparency through detailed provisions on data exchange and on-site inspections. Limitations. Implementation challenges, as the dissolution of the Soviet Union led to the emergence of multiple successor states with nuclear weapons. While the treaty reduced the number of strategic nuclear weapons, thousands of warheads still remained in both countries' arsenals. Start 2. Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty 2, 1993. Achievements. Further limited the number of strategic nuclear weapons with the goal of reducing each side's arsenal by about 2/3 from Cold War peak levels. Mandated the elimination of multiple independently targetable re-entry vehicles, MIRVs, on ICBMs, addressing concerns about first strike capabilities. Limitations. The treaty was never fully implemented due to political and strategic disagreements between the United States and Russia. The U.S. withdrawal from the Anti-Ballistic Missile ABM Treaty in 2002 further strained relations and contributed to the treaty's ultimate demise. SORT, Strategic Offensive Reductions Treaty, also known as the Moscow Treaty, 2002. Achievements. Established a new framework for U.S.-Russian arms control, with both countries agreeing to further reduce their strategic nuclear arsenals. Focused on reducing operationally deployed warheads, leading to a lower number of strategic nuclear weapons in active service. Limitations. The treaty was criticized for its lack of verification and transparency measures, which made it difficult to assess compliance. The treaty did not address non-strategic nuclear weapons, nor did it require the destruction of warheads removed from deployment. New START, New Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty, 2010. Achievements: built upon the successes of previous treaties, further limiting the number of deployed strategic nuclear warheads and delivery systems. Reintroduced robust verification and transparency measures, including on-site inspections and data exchanges, which helped to build trust and confidence. Limitations: the treaty does not address non-strategic nuclear weapons, nor non-deployed strategic warheads. Geopolitical tensions between the United States and Russia, along with the expiration of the treaty in 2021, though extended until 2026, raise concerns about the future of arms control efforts. In summary, the series of strategic arms limitation treaties, from START 1 to New START, have played a significant role in reducing the number of strategic nuclear weapons held by the United States and Russia. These treaties have contributed to increased stability, transparency, and confidence building between the two countries. However, limitations remain in terms of treaty implementation, the scope of weapons covered, and the geopolitical context in which these treaties have been negotiated and enforced. Chapter 6: Proliferation. Nuclear proliferation, or the spread of nuclear weapons and technology, poses a multitude of risks and concerns for global security and stability. Here, I try to outline some of the key issues associated with nuclear proliferation so we can have a bit of a frame of reference when looking at specific states, such as Israel, India, Pakistan, Iran, and North Korea. Increased risk of nuclear conflict. With more countries possessing nuclear weapons, the likelihood of a nuclear conflict may increase. Even a limited nuclear exchange between two countries could have catastrophic consequences for the entire world, causing massive casualties, devastating environmental effects, and long-lasting socioeconomic impacts. Arms race. Nuclear proliferation may spur regional arms races, as countries feel compelled to develop their nuclear capabilities in response to perceived threats from their neighbors. Arms races could lead to heightened tensions, increased military spending, and a reduced focus on diplomatic solutions to conflicts. Accidents and unauthorized use. As more countries develop nuclear weapons, the risk of accidents or unauthorized use of these weapons also increases. Inexperienced or inadequately trained personnel, insufficient safety measures, and the potential for human error could lead to accidental detonations or the unauthorized launch of nuclear weapons. Terrorism and non-state actors. Nuclear proliferation raises concerns about nuclear weapons or materials falling into the hands of terrorists or other non-state actors. Terrorist groups with access to nuclear weapons or materials could use them to carry out devastating attacks, causing unprecedented destruction and chaos. Weakening of the global non-proliferation regime. The spread of nuclear weapons may weaken the international non-proliferation regime, including the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, NPT. If more countries pursue nuclear weapons, the credibility of the NPT and other non-proliferation efforts may be undermined, making it more difficult to prevent further proliferation. Diversion of resources. The pursuit of nuclear weapons requires significant financial and technical resources. Countries that invest in nuclear weapons programs may divert resources away from other important areas, such as education, healthcare, and infrastructure development, potentially hindering their social and economic progress. Environmental and health risks. Nuclear proliferation increases the risk of nuclear accidents, which can have severe environmental and health consequences. Radioactive contamination from nuclear accidents can cause long-lasting damage to ecosystems, agricultural lands, and human health, as witnessed in the aftermath of Chernobyl and Fukushima nuclear disasters. Israel. The story of Israel's nuclear program dates back to the 1950s. With the assistance of France, Israel constructed the Dimona nuclear facility in the Negev desert. The primary goal was to develop a nuclear deterrent in response to perceived existential threats from neighboring Arab countries. Israel has maintained a policy of nuclear ambiguity, neither confirming nor denying the possession of nuclear weapons. However, it is widely believed that the country has developed a sizable arsenal of nuclear warheads. As for security concerns, Israel's nuclear program has generated mixed reactions. On one hand, the existence of a nuclear deterrent has contributed to regional stability by deterring potential adversaries from launching large-scale attacks. On the other hand, Israel's nuclear arsenal raises concerns about an arms race in the Middle East, as other countries in the region may aspire to develop their nuclear capabilities in response. Regarding nuclear treaties, Israel has not signed the Treaty on Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, which aims to prevent the spread of nuclear weapons, promote the peaceful use of nuclear energy, and advance disarmament efforts. Israel's reluctance to join the NPT stems from its policy of nuclear ambiguity and the belief that signing the treaty could compromise its national security. Despite not being a party to the NPT, Israel has signed the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, CTBT, but has yet to ratify it. The CTBT prohibits all nuclear weapon test explosions and any other nuclear explosions. Israel's participation in this treaty is seen as a positive step, but its failure to ratify the treaty leaves room for speculation about its commitment to a nuclear test ban. In conclusion, Israel's nuclear proliferation is a complex issue with both stabilizing and destabilizing implications. While the country's nuclear program has provided it with a strong deterrent against potential adversaries, it has also raised concerns about regional security and arms races. Israel's ambiguous stance on nuclear weapons and its reluctance to sign the NPT further complicate the situation, making it a critical topic of discussion in the ongoing debate on global nuclear non-proliferation and disarmament. India and Pakistan. India and Pakistan embarked on their respective nuclear programs in response to regional security threats and geopolitical considerations. India's pursuit of nuclear weapons began in the 1960s, partly driven by concerns about China's nuclear capabilities. India conducted its first nuclear test in 1974, claiming it to be a peaceful nuclear explosion. However, this event alarmed Pakistan, leading to an acceleration of its nuclear program, which culminated in Pakistan's first nuclear test in 1998, shortly after India's second round of tests that same year. The nuclear programs of India and Pakistan have raised several security concerns. Firstly, the nuclear capabilities of both nations have added a new dimension to their long-standing conflict, particularly over the disputed territory of Kashmir. This situation increases the risk of a nuclear conflict in South Asia, either by deliberate escalation or through miscalculation during a crisis. Not to mention that India and Pakistan are engaged in a nuclear arms race, with both nations constantly modernizing and expanding their arsenals. This competition could divert resources away from social and economic development and further fuel tensions in the region. Secondly, there are concerns about the security of nuclear materials and weapons in both India and Pakistan. The possibility of these weapons or materials falling into the hands of terrorists or other non-state actors is a significant security risk, with potentially catastrophic consequences. Thirdly, both India and Pakistan have not signed the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, NPT, which undermines the credibility and effectiveness of the international non-proliferation regime. Moreover, neither India nor Pakistan is a party to the NPT. Both countries argue that the treaty is discriminatory, as it allows only the 5 recognized nuclear weapon states, the US, Russia, China, France, and the UK, to possess nuclear weapons. However, India and Pakistan have both expressed support for global disarmament and non-proliferation efforts, and both have signed and ratified the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, CTBT, which prohibits all nuclear explosions. In conclusion, nuclear proliferation in India and Pakistan poses significant security concerns in the region and globally. While both countries have expressed support for disarmament and non-proliferation initiatives, their refusal to join the NPT and the ongoing arms race between them contribute to the complexity of the situation. Addressing these concerns requires sustained diplomatic efforts, confidence-building measures, and engagement in dialogue to reduce tensions and promote regional stability. Iran. Iran's interest in nuclear technology dates back to the 1950s under the rule of Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi. Iran's initial nuclear pursuits were focused on peaceful applications, such as power generation and research, with assistance from the United States and Western Europe under the Atoms for Peace program. However, following the 1979 Islamic Revolution, Iran's nuclear program took a more secretive turn, raising concerns about its intentions. The international community became increasingly worried about Iran's nuclear program in the early 2000s, when it was revealed that Iran had been conducting undeclared nuclear activities, including uranium enrichment and the construction of secret facilities. These concerns led to suspicions that Iran might be seeking to develop nuclear weapons, which would pose a significant security threat to the region and the world. Iran's nuclear program also raises several security concerns. The first concern is in regard to regional instability. A nuclear-armed Iran could significantly alter the balance of power in the Middle East, potentially leading to an arms race and increased tensions among regional actors, particularly with Israel and Saudi Arabia. The second major concern is the possibility of a nuclear conflict involving Iran, either as a result of deliberate escalation or miscalculation during a crisis, which is a major concern for global security. The final concern is that Iran's nuclear program increases the possibility of nuclear materials or technology falling into the hands of terrorist organizations or other non-state actors, with potentially catastrophic consequences. In response to concerns about Iran's nuclear program, the international community negotiated the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, JCPOA, in 2015, which imposed strict limits on Iran's nuclear activities in exchange for the lifting of economic sanctions. However, the United States withdrew from the agreement in 2018, leading to increased tensions and uncertainty about the future of the deal. In conclusion, Iran's nuclear program has generated significant security concerns, both regionally and globally. While Iran is a party to the NPT and has participated in the JCPOA, ongoing concerns about its nuclear intentions and activities underscore the need for continued international engagement, diplomacy, and verification efforts to ensure Iran's compliance with non-proliferation norms and to promote regional stability. North Korea. North Korea's pursuit of nuclear weapons can be traced back to the Cold War, driven by concerns about its national security and the desire to assert itself as a regional power. The collapse of the Soviet Union in the early 1990s heightened North Korea's sense of vulnerability, prompting it to accelerate its nuclear weapons program. North Korea's nuclear ambitions were further fueled by its isolation from the international community, its economic struggles, and the desire to maintain the regime's survival. If you are even remotely observant of the news, you will be fully aware of the security concerns the North Korean nuclear program possesses. If we circle back to the prologue and remember my opening statement that atomic energy is sustainable into the future as long as there is accountability, then North Korea flies in the face of that requirement. The Kim dynasty has no accountability to its subjects, the international community, and, at times, not even its only ally, China. The Hermit Kingdom is the exact opposite of what you want in a nuclear-equipped state. But enough with broad strokes. Let's get into the specifics. North Korea's nuclear capabilities have significantly increased tensions in the region, particularly with South Korea, Japan, and the United States. The potential for a nuclear conflict on the Korean Peninsula, either through deliberate escalation or miscalculation, is a serious concern for regional security. In addition, North Korea's nuclear program could lead to an arms race in the region, as other countries feel compelled to develop their own nuclear capabilities in response to the perceived threat posed by North Korea. As for international nuclear treaties, North Korea initially joined the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, NPT, in 1985, but withdrew from the treaty in 2003, citing perceived threats to its sovereignty and security. Since withdrawing from the NPT, North Korea has conducted multiple nuclear tests and developed a range of ballistic missiles, further exacerbating security concerns. In conclusion, North Korea's nuclear proliferation presents significant security challenges for regional and global stability. Despite participating in the NPT in the past, North Korea's subsequent withdrawal and continued development of its nuclear program underscore the need for diplomatic efforts, including negotiations, sanctions, and confidence-building measures, to address the threats posed by North Korea's nuclear ambitions and to promote peace and stability on the Korean Peninsula and beyond. Chapter 7. The Trade-offs. Nuclear energy has long been a subject of debate, with proponents highlighting its potential as a clean and efficient power source, while detractors emphasize the risks associated with nuclear accidents, waste disposal, and weapons proliferation. This will be my final evaluation of the various trade-offs of nuclear energy, considering factors such as waste disposal, clean energy production, accidents, medical applications, weapons proliferation, and other relevant aspects. Clean energy production. One of the primary benefits of nuclear energy is its ability to generate large amounts of electricity with relatively low greenhouse gas emissions. Unlike fossil fuels, nuclear power does not produce significant air pollution or contribute to climate change, making it an attractive option for countries seeking to reduce their carbon footprint and transition to cleaner energy sources. However, the environmental benefits of nuclear energy must be weighed against the challenges of waste disposal and the potential for accidents. Waste disposal. Nuclear power plants generate radioactive waste, which poses a significant challenge in terms of safe disposal and long-term storage. While technological advancements have improved waste management practices, finding suitable locations for waste repositories remains a contentious issue, often met with public opposition due to concerns about contamination and environmental degradation. The trade-off between the clean energy production of nuclear power and the complexities of waste disposal is an essential factor to consider when evaluating nuclear energy's overall benefits and risks. Accidents. The potential for nuclear accidents, such as those at Chernobyl in 1986 and Fukushima in 2011, represents a significant risk associated with nuclear energy. Although the frequency of such accidents is incredibly low, their consequences can be devastating, resulting in loss of life, long-term health issues, environmental damage, and economic disruption. The trade-off between the benefits of nuclear power and the risks associated with accidents is a critical aspect of the nuclear energy debate, however, one that must be balanced within the context of the alternatives. Here are estimates for the two most significant nuclear accidents. Chernobyl, 1986. The immediate death toll from the explosion and subsequent fires at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant was relatively low, with 28 workers and firefighters dying from acute radiation sickness. However, the long-term health effects of the disaster are much more challenging to quantify. The United Nations Scientific Committee on the Effects of Atomic Radiation reported that by 2005, approximately 4,000 additional deaths were attributable to radiation exposure among the most affected groups. Fukushima, 2011. There were no immediate deaths caused by radiation exposure at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant accident. However, the evacuation process and long-term health effects have been linked to additional fatalities. According to the Japanese government, over 2,000 people died as a result of the evacuation process, with causes such as physical and mental stress, suicide, and inadequate healthcare facilities. The World Health Organization estimates that the risk of cancer-related deaths due to radiation exposure among the most affected individuals is low, but not negligible. In addition to these two major accidents, there have been other incidents with fatalities, such as the Kishtim disaster in 1957 and the SL-1 reactor incident in the United States in 1961. However, the number of deaths from these incidents is significantly lower than those of Chernobyl and Fukushima. Now, for context, let us put coal and oil through the same level of scrutiny. Estimating the total number of lives claimed by coal and oil accidents is challenging due to various factors, such as the difficulty in tracking every incident and attributing specific causes of death in some cases. Furthermore, the long-term health effects of pollution from coal and oil production are also significant contributors to the overall impact. Nevertheless, here are some key points to consider when discussing the human toll of coal and oil accidents. Coal mining accidents. Throughout history, coal mining has been responsible for numerous fatal accidents, ranging from underground explosions and collapses to transportation accidents. According to the International Labor Organization, thousands of miners die each year from mining accidents. In the United States alone, the Mine Safety and Health Administration, MSHA, reports that over 14,000 coal miners have died in accidents since 1990. Coal-related pollution. Pollution from coal combustion is another significant factor contributing to human fatalities. The burning of coal releases harmful pollutants, such as sulfur dioxide, nitrogen oxides, and particulate matter, which contribute to respiratory and cardiovascular diseases. A 2010 study published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences estimated that the coal industry's air pollution in the United States was responsible for 52,000 premature deaths per year. Oil-related accidents. Oil industry accidents such as spills, fires, and explosions have also claimed lives. The most well-known oil-related disaster is the 1989 Exxon Valdez oil spill, which resulted in significant environmental damage but relatively few human casualties. In contrast, the 2010 Deepwater Horizon oil rig explosion resulted in the death of 11 workers and the injury of 17 others. However, it is important to note that the number of lives lost in oil-related accidents is generally lower than those in the coal industry. Oil-related pollution. The pollution associated with the extraction, refining, and combustion of oil products is also a significant contributor to human fatalities. Emissions from oil combustion, such as fine particulate matter and other toxic air pollutants, can lead to respiratory and cardiovascular diseases. The exact number of premature deaths caused by oil-related pollution is difficult to quantify, but is likely to be significant, particularly in urban areas with heavy traffic and industrial activity. But wait, there's more. It's now time for renewables. Although accidents in the renewable energy sector occur, the overall number of fatalities tends to be lower than those in coal, oil, and nuclear industries, with the exception of hydroelectricity. Here are some notable examples. Banqiao Dam, 1975. The Banqiao Dam failure in China is considered the deadliest hydroelectric accident in history. The dam's collapse caused a series of downstream dam failures, leading to catastrophic flooding. The estimated death toll was approximately 171,000, with millions more affected by displacement, property loss, and subsequent famine. Vajont Dam, 1963. The Vajont Dam disaster in Italy occurred when a massive landslide caused a displacement wave to overtop the dam, leading to a flood that devastated several villages. Approximately 2,000 people were killed in this disaster. St. Francis Dam, 1928. The St. Francis Dam in California collapsed due to design flaws and geological instability. The resulting flood killed more than 400 people and caused extensive property damage. Machu Picchu Dam, 1979. The Machu Picchu Dam in India failed due to heavy rainfall and inadequate spillway capacity, causing a flood that killed an estimated 5,000 to 25,000 people. Malpasset Dam, 1959. The Malpasset Dam in France collapsed due to geological instability and inadequate foundation, resulting in a flood that killed more than 400 people. South Fork Dam, 1889. The South Fork Dam failure in Pennsylvania, known as the Johnstown Flood, occurred due to poor maintenance and design flaws. The flood killed more than 2,200 people and caused significant property damage. These examples demonstrate that hydroelectric accidents have the potential to cause significant loss of life, particularly when dams fail due to design flaws, geological instability, or inadequate maintenance, all of which are similar risks related to nuclear energy. Medicine. Nuclear technology has numerous applications in medicine, such as in diagnostic imaging and cancer treatment. Radioisotopes are widely used in medical procedures, and nuclear reactors play a crucial role in producing these isotopes. While the benefits of nuclear technology in medicine are undeniable, the production and use of radioisotopes also carry inherent risks, including the potential for accidents, exposure to radiation, and theft of materials for malicious purposes. However, the lives saved, in my estimate, greatly outweigh the risks. This is due to the incredible level of security that is a feature of nuclear energy supply chains. Weapons proliferation. The development of nuclear energy is closely linked to the proliferation of nuclear weapons. The same technology used to generate electricity can also be employed to produce weapons-grade materials, raising concerns about the potential for nuclear weapons proliferation. Balancing the benefits of nuclear energy with the risks of weapons proliferation is a complex and multifaceted challenge that must be addressed through international cooperation, diplomacy, and effective non-proliferation regimes. Nuclear energy presents a range of trade-offs, with its potential as a clean and efficient power source weighed against the challenges of waste disposal, accidents, and weapons proliferation. Additionally, the benefits of nuclear technology in medicine must be balanced against the associated risks. Ultimately, the decision to pursue or abandon nuclear energy depends on factors such as accountability, international communication, and verification of nation-state participation. If we can do that, then humanity will maintain its ability to control the power of the nuclear age. This has been The Nuclear Age, written by Blake Hamilton, narrated by Dan Levy, copyright 2023 by Blake Hamilton, production copyright by Blake Hamilton.